I'll never forget the sound of my father's voice that Sunday morning, the way it cracked when he told me, "Son, one day that Harley will carry more than just UIL. Carry every memory we've built together." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. I was just a kid watching him polish chrome, the smell of oil and leather clinging to the garage. It was 1972. Nixon was president. My dad had just come home from working a double shift at the mill. That Harley wasn't just a motorcycle. It was the soundtrack of my childhood. I'd sit on the curb, barefoot, in the warm Kansas dirt, listening to the low rumble as Dad rolled back into our driveway. Mom would lean out the kitchen window, apron still tied, yelling, "Dinner's almost ready. Don't you bring that grease in here." My sister and I would laugh because Dad would wink, then smuggle us both inside anyway, pretending not to hear her. Fast forward nearly 50 years. Dad's been gone almost a decade. Mom's old house sits quiet most days, the screen door squeaking the same way it always has. And that, Harley, it's still mine. I keep it polished in my garage like he taught me, only now. Instead of my father's hands guiding mine, it's my grandson peeking around the corner, asking if he can touch the shiny handlebars. Life circles back like that. Or at least, it used to feel that way until the day Karen's boy decided that bike should belong to him. It started at a neighborhood BBQ, the kind we still have here in small-town Missouri, where folks bring their best potato salad. Old couples argue about who makes the better baked beans. And someone always brings a pitcher of sweet tea strong enough to rot your teeth. My wife, Linda, was sitting with the other ladies talking about church fundraisers. I was at the grill flipping burgers, my grandson running around with sparklers, even though the 4th of July had long passed. Then he showed up, Kyle, 20-something. Tall, thin, with a smug smirk like the world owed him something. He was Karen's son, yes. It's that Karen? The one who was always writing complaint letters to the HOA about lawn lengths? Barking dogs and trash cans being an inch out of line. Folks around here tolerated her only because her husband had been a decent man before he passed. Kyle strutted into the yard, all sunglasses on even though the sun was setting, and went straight for the cooler. Didn't say hello, didn't bring a dish, just cracked open a beer and looked around like he owned the place. "Hey, old man," he called to me from across the yard, smirking. "That Harley you've got in your garage, how much you want for it?" The chatter around us went quiet. Everyone knew that bike wasn't just some motorcycle. It was my father's legacy, my heart, my family's history in steel and chrome. I forced a polite smile. "It's not for sale, son," I said, keeping my voice calm. "That bike's been in my family for over 50 years. He snorted. "Come on, everything's got a price. I'll give you 10 grand. Cash." I shook my head. "It's not about money. That should have been the end of it." But Kyle wasn't raised with the word no. Later that week, I caught him snooping around my garage. The nerve of it standing there with his hands shoved in his pockets, whistling like he wasn't casing the place. "What are you doing here?" I asked, stepping onto the driveway. He shrugged. "Just checking out what you're hoarding. Crazy to think you'd rather let that Harley rot than give it to someone who'd actually ride it." I clenched my fists but held my ground. That Harley belonged to my father. He worked his fingers to the bone to buy it, and every mile on it tells the story of our family. "You think I'm going to hand that over to some kid who doesn't understand what sacrifice is?" Kyle sneered. "You old guys and your stories. It's just a bike. My mom says the HOA can make you get rid of it if it's not registered right." That's when I felt the first sting of anger. It wasn't just disrespect, it was threats. I closed the garage door in his face and walked back inside, heart pounding. Linda was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of chili, and she took one look at me and said, "Who was it this time?" I sat at the table, rubbing my temples. "Karen's boy. He wants the Harley." She stopped stirring. Oh, Lord, this isn't going to end well. Days passed, but the tension only grew. Kyle strutted around the neighborhood like he owned it, telling folks I was being selfish, that I was hogging a piece of history that should belong to someone who actually used it. Karen backed him up, of course. She cornered Linda at the mailbox one morning, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You know, dear, it's such a shame your husband clings to that old motorcycle. He could do the neighborhood a favor and let Kyle have it. He's young, strong, and would really show it off. Linda, bless her, didn't take the bait. She just smiled politely and said that Harley's not just metal and wheels. It's family. But Karen wasn't one to back down. She filed a complaint with the HOA, claiming my Harley was a nuisance vehicle that hadn't been properly stored. They scheduled a hearing. Imagine that, facing a committee over a bike that had more soul than all their pristine minivans combined. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the garage, sat on an old wooden stool, and stared at the Harley. The chrome reflected the single bulb overhead, the leather seat still carrying faint cracks from Dad's years of riding. I ran my hand over the handlebars and whispered, "What would you do, Dad?" That's when the memories came flooding back. My first ride on the back of the bike, clinging to him as we roared down country roads. The way he laughed when the rain soaked us to the bone, but we didn't care. The time he surprised Mom by driving it all the way to the lake for their anniversary picnic. It wasn't just a Harley. It was him. It was us, and no smug kid or nosy HOA president was going to take that from me. The hearing was a circus. Karen sat in the front row, arms folded, Kyle beside her with that same smirk. The HOA board looked uncomfortable, but they entertained her complaint anyway. She droned on about community standards and visual harmony. While Kyle leaned back like he'd already won, when it was my turn to speak, I didn't argue about rules or regulations. I told them the truth. This motorcycle, I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion, isn't a toy. It's not just transportation. It's the last piece of my father I have left. He was a veteran, a working man, a father who gave everything he had so his family could have more. Every mile on that odometer was earned by sweat and sacrifice. And you want to call it a nuisance? You want to strip away a man's memories because it doesn't fit your idea of neatness? The room went silent. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, one of the board members cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Johnson," he said, glancing at Karen, "this isn't a matter for the HOA. We don't govern private property inside closed garages. Case dismissed." I thought that was the end of it, but Kyle wasn't done. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of police sirens outside my home. The scream of sirens outside our house that morning didn't just rattle the windows, it rattled my bones. For a split second, I thought of the old days when the only thing that woke us up was the smell of bacon frying or the creak of the back screen door. Now, flashing red and blue lights spilled across the neighborhood like judgment had arrived. Linda rushed to the window, clutching her robe. What on earth? But I already knew. By the time I stepped outside, 2 squad cars were parked in front of my driveway. Officers stood near the hood, arms crossed, while Kyle puffed out his chest and pointed at me like some kind of courtroom star witness. Karen hovered behind him, whispering in his ear, her arms folded like a general surveying a battlefield. "There he is," Kyle shouted the second he saw me. "That's the guy. He's hiding stolen property in his garage." The crowd of neighbors gathered like moths to a flame. Some leaned on their fences, others pulled out their phones, and a few whispered amongst themselves. Nothing like a neighborhood scandal to make folks forget about mowing their lawns. One of the officers, a stocky man with tired eyes, approached me. "Sir, we've received a report of stolen property being stored on your premises. We need to take a look inside your garage." I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't the happy kind. Stolen property. That's my father's Harley. Been in my family for 50 years, Kyle smirked, leaning toward the officer. "Ask him for the paperwork. Bet he can't even prove he owns it." That one cut deep. Because while I did have old papers, titles, and insurance slips, they were scattered across boxes in the attic. My dad bought that Harley long before digital records, and half the files were handwritten. Would that matter to these officers? Or would the word of a smug young man and his overbearing mother weigh heavier? Linda stepped outside then, chin high, her voice steady. "Officers, my husband has every right to that motorcycle. It's been part of this family longer than that boy has been alive," Karen snapped. "Don't you dare talk about my son like that. He's been nothing but respectful. So your husband's been hoarding something that should belong to someone who actually rides?" My blood boiled. Respectful. He broke into my garage. That's trespassing. Kyle rolled his eyes. I was just looking. Everyone knows you don't even ride it anymore. Bikes are meant to be on the road, not collecting dust with some old man clinging to the past. That's when the memory of my father's voice echoed in my head again. One day that Harley will carry more than just you, it'll carry every memory we've built together. And I realized Kyle didn't just want the bike. He wanted to erase the meaning behind it. The officer looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, can we take a quick look, just to confirm ownership? For a moment, I hesitated. Then I nodded. Fine, but you're about to waste your time. I led them into the garage. The smell of oil and leather hit us the second I opened the door. The Harley gleamed under the single bulb, polished to perfection, every inch a reminder of my father's hands. The officer's eyes widened slightly, whether from admiration or suspicion, I couldn't tell. See? Kyle said, stepping forward like it was already his. That's it. That's the bike. Exactly the one I told you about. The officer raised an eyebrow. You filed the report? Kyle puffed his chest. Yeah, that Harley was stolen years ago. Belongs to a collector down in Arkansas. My buddy told me about it. That was his story? A buddy told him. I shook my head in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. But Karen chimed in, her voice sharp as a knife. He's telling the truth. I raised my son better than to lie. That motorcycle looks exactly like the one we heard about in the news. Linda stepped forward, fire in her eyes. You two don't know the first thing about this bike. That's my father-in-law's pride and joy. We still have photos of him on it from the 1970s. Do you think thieves pose for family pictures? The neighbors murmured, some nodding, others whispering. The tide of opinion was shifting, but Kyle wasn't giving up. The officer sighed. Sir, do you have any paperwork, titles, registration, anything to prove this Harley belongs to you? I swallowed hard. Yes, but they're old documents. Some in my dad's handwriting. Give me a day, and I'll dig them up. Kyle smirked. Convenient. Something inside me snapped, then not anger, but sadness. Sadness that a kid like him couldn't see beyond his own entitlement. Sadness that my father's memory was being dragged through the mud because of greed. I turned to the officer. Do what you need to do. But that bike isn't stolen. It's family. And I'll prove it if it takes every last box in my attic. That night, I dug through every dusty corner of the house. Linda helped, handing me boxes while our grandson sat on the floor wide-eyed. We found old photographs, Dad on the Harley with me riding behind him, Mom laughing in the background. Even one of him parked in front of the mill with grease-stained hands still holding the handlebars. But the real treasure came at the bottom of an old tin boxan original bill of sale dated 1972. With my father's signature scrawled across the bottom, my heart nearly burst. Look at this, I whispered, handing it to Linda. This is proof, she smiled through tears. Your daddy would be proud. I placed the paper gently on the table, feeling the weight of 50 years lift from my shoulders. But just as relief settled in, the phone rang. It was my cousin, James. The state attorney, James had always been more like a brother to me than a cousin. We grew up sharing summer chores, sneaking sodas at the corner store, and fishing by the creek until the fireflies came out. But while I stayed in town, working blue-collar jobs like my dad, James went off to law school. Now he was one of the sharpest legal minds in the state. He spoke low and steady. Heard about your situation? Karen's been running her mouth in places she shouldn't. Kyle's bragging too. You want me to step in? I hesitated. I don't want to drag family into this mess. You're not dragging me in, James replied firmly. You're defending what's yours. And if those cops even think about pushing this case, I'll be standing right next to you in that courtroom. I sat there in silence, the bill of sale in my hands, the hum of the fridge filling the quiet kitchen. For the first time in days, I felt hope. Thanks, James, I whispered. I think I'm going to need you. The next morning I walked out to find Kyle standing on the sidewalk again, phone in hand, smirk plastered on his face. Enjoy the bike while you can, old man. Cops are coming back today. Bet they tow it before lunch. But I wasn't scared anymore. Not with the proof in my hands, not with my family beside me, and certainly not with the state attorney ready to back me up. I smiled, maybe even a little too confidently. Kyle, you might want to call your mom, because things are about to get a whole lot messier than you planned. He frowned, confused, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like my father's spirit was right there beside me, steady, strong, and ready for the fight. The next morning carried a strange kind of calm. The air smelled of dew and fresh-cut grass. Birds sang in the oak trees, and for a moment, it almost felt like any other day. But deep down, I knew storm clouds were brewing. I spent the early hours polishing the Harley, the chrome-catching streaks of sunrise. It wasn't just about keeping it clean, it was about grounding myself, reminding myself why this fight mattered. That bike wasn't just steel and rubber. It was every mile with my dad, every summer night ride, every Sunday afternoon when neighbors waved as we rumbled down Main Street. Linda brought me a mug of coffee and sat on the workbench, quiet for a while before she finally said, "You know, your father would be proud of how you're standing your ground." I nodded, staring at the reflection of my weathered face in the tank. I just wish he were here to see it. That's when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. A black sedan pulled up in front of the house, clean and sharp. Out stepped James, my cousin, the state attorney. He wore a suit, but when he grinned, I saw the same boy who used to bait hooks for me on summer afternoons. "Morning, cuz," he said, clasping my shoulder. "Heard you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." I chuckled. Didn't mean to. But you know me, never been good at letting go of what matters. James looked at the Harley, whistling low. "Lord, I remember riding on the back of that thing when we were kids. Your dad would scare the daylights out of us, taking those turns too sharp." For a second, we both laughed, the kind of laugh only shared history can bring. Then his face turned serious. "All right, let's get this settled." By mid-morning, the police were back. Same officers as before, looking more weary than suspicious this time. And of course, Karen and Kyle were right behind them, like vultures circling fresh meat. Neighbors gathered against front porches, sidewalks, leaning fences. Small-town life has its flaws, but when something goes down, everyone's watching. Kyle pointed at me the moment he saw the squad cars. "There, that's the guy. I told you he was hiding stolen property." But before the officers could respond, James stepped forward, calm as a Sunday preacher. "Actually, gentlemen, I think you'll want to hear me out first. My name's James Walker, state attorney for this county, and I'm here representing my cousin." The murmurs rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Karen's smug face faltered, and Kyle's smirk slipped just a little. One officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we didn't realize," James cut him off with a firm nod. "You're just doing your jobs. But this young man here?" He gestured at Kyle. "Has made false claims about a motorcycle that has been legally owned by this family for over 50 years. He turned to me. "Show them." Stepped forward, holding the old bill of sale, my hand steady now. "This is the original purchase document from 1972. My father's signature is right there. We also have decades of family photos with this Harley, proving its continuous presence in our family." The officers examined the paper, flipping it over, nodding slowly. James's voice grew sharp. "And if you'd like further verification, I've already contacted the DMV. They confirmed there has never been a report of this Harley being stolen. Registration has been consistent. This bike is as legal as apple pie." Kyle's face turned red. "That's a lie. My buddy told me." James cut him off, his eyes narrowing. "Your buddy told you? Or did you fabricate a story to try to steal property that never belonged to you?" Karen rushed forward, her voice shrill. "Don't you dare accuse my son. He was only trying to make sure justice was done." James's gaze hardened. "Justice? Ma'am, filing false reports is a criminal offense. Wasting police resources, harassing your neighbors, attempting to coerce property through intimidation, all of that carries consequences." A few neighbors shook their heads, muttering. Some even laughed under their breath. Kyle's bravado crumbled. He stammered, I didn't mean..." But Karen cut him off again, glaring at me like it was all my fault. This wouldn't have happened if you'd just given him the bike. You're too stubborn to admit someone else deserves it more. That's when something in me broke, but not in anger. In sadness, I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a bitter woman, but a lonely widow clinging to her son. Trying to fill the void her husband's death left behind, I took a deep breath. Karen, this Harley isn't about pride or possession. It's about family. My dad poured his life into it. Every ride carried his love, his sacrifice, his lessons. And I've tried to pass that on to my kids, my grandkids. It's not just a bike, it's the bond between generations. You can't put a price on that. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rustle of leaves. For the first time, Karen's face softened. Not much, but enough. Her eyes flickered with something like regret before she quickly turned away. The officers handed my documents back. Sir, everything checks out. You have nothing to worry about. We're closing this case. Relief washed over me, but James wasn't done. He turned to Kyle, his voice low and steady. Son, you're lucky we're not pressing charges today. But you need to understand something. Respect isn't earned by taking what doesn't belong to you. It's earned by building your own story, your own legacy. This Harley carries his father's story. If you want something worth holding on to, go make your own. Kyle dropped his gaze, shame written all over his face. For once, he didn't have a comeback. Karen grabbed his arm, muttering under her breath, and the two of them slunk away. Avoiding the eyes of every neighbor watching, that evening, the neighborhood felt different. Folks stopped by with casseroles, pies, even a six-pack or two small-town ways of saying, we're with you. One neighbor, old Mr. Thompson, slapped my back and said that bike deserves a parade. Not a police report, he laughed, and for the first time in weeks, my heart felt light. Later, as the sun dipped low, I sat in the garage with my grandson. He climbed up onto the Harley's seat, his little hands gripping the handlebars, just like I used to. His eyes sparkled with wonder. Grandpa, he whispered one day, will this be mine? I smiled, my chest tightening with both joy and nostalgia. One day, son, but only if you promise me something, he nodded eagerly. What? That you'll remember it's not just a bike, it's family, it's love, and it's every ride we take together. He grinned, and in that moment, I saw my father's spirit shining through those young eyes. As I closed the garage for the night, I realized the fight wasn't just about keeping a Harley. It was about protecting what matters most, the bonds that tie us to our past, the lessons we carry into the future, and the love we leave behind for those who come after us. Maybe Kyle would never understand. Maybe Karen would always be bitter. But my family knew. My neighbors knew. And deep down, I knew my father was looking down with a smile, because in the end, the Harley didn't just survive another challenge. It reminded me that some things in life aren't meant to be sold, argued over, or taken. They're meant to be cherished, guarded, and passed on with love. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real ride of a lifetime.